What if the biggest move in modern Formula One doesn't happen because of money, trophies, or contracts, but because one relationship quietly disappeared behind the scenes? 4 years. It felt impossible to imagine Max Verstappen anywhere other than Red Bull. He was their creation, their long-term project, the driver who turned them into an unstoppable force. But beneath the wins and celebrations, something far more fragile was holding that partnership together. And once it cracked, the future of Formula One suddenly became very uncertain. At the start of 2024, Red Bull still looked untouchable from the outside. They had the fastest car, the most dominant driver, and total control of the grid. But internally, things were far from calm. Reports began to surface about investigations involving senior leadership, creating tension and uncertainty within the team. While the full details were never publicly confirmed, the effect was clear. Trust was shaken, focus was disrupted, and Red Bull's once solid image began to show cracks. For drivers at the very top, those cracks matter. They don't just think about lap times, they think about stability, direction, and whether the team around them will still be strong in 3 or 4 years' time. For Max Verstappen, Red Bull was never just an employer. It was a structure built around one key figure, Helmut Marko. Marko wasn't simply an advisor or executive. He was the man who brought Verstappen into Formula One as a teenager, defended him during controversial moments, and shielded him from internal politics. Their relationship went far beyond business. Marko was trust, guidance, and protection. In a sport as ruthless as Formula One, that kind of loyalty is rare. So when reports emerged suggesting Marko's position at Red Bull could be under threat, Verstappen reacted immediately. He didn't hide his feelings or speak in vague terms. He made it clear, publicly, that Marko's presence mattered to him. That wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a calculated signal. By tying his own future to Marko's, Verstappen reminded Red Bull management exactly how much influence he held. And while Red Bull tried to calm the situation internally, someone else was watching very closely. Toto Wolff didn't miss the opportunity. When he joked about Helmut Marko potentially joining Mercedes, it sounded light-hearted on the surface. But in Formula One, comments like that are rarely accidental. Wolff wasn't just joking. He was sending a message. If things became uncomfortable at Red Bull, Mercedes would be ready, not just for Verstappen, but for the people around him who mattered most. It was subtle, clever positioning, offering stability without making a direct move. At the time, it all felt theoretical, interesting, but distant. That changed towards the end of 2025. Helmut Marko announced he would leave Red Bull earlier than expected, closing a chapter that had lasted decades. Official explanations were carefully worded, but the timing spoke volumes. The man who had anchored Verstappen to Red Bull was gone, and with him went a major reason for Max to feel emotionally tied to the team. From that moment on, loyalty alone was no longer enough. What remained was performance, and that made one part of Verstappen's contract far more important than most fans realized. Although he is officially signed until 2028, reports suggest a performance clause allows him to leave at the end of 2026 if Red Bull can't deliver a competitive car. That turns 2026 into a deadline, not on paper, but in reality. For the first time in his career, Verstappen holds all the power. His management has already hinted that 2026 will be a defining year, not because of drama or politics, but because of results. And that's where Red Bull's biggest gamble enters the picture. For the new regulations, Red Bull is building its own power unit from scratch. Backed by Ford, the project is ambitious, but incredibly risky. Designing a competitive Formula One engine is one of the hardest challenges in motorsports. Even manufacturers with decades of experience struggle to get it right. What raised concern wasn't just the scale of the challenge, but the tone coming from Red Bull leadership. Expectations were being managed. Comparisons with established manufacturers were avoided. Comments hinted that immediate success wasn't guaranteed. That's not the language a top driver wants to hear on the eve of a regulation reset, especially when championships are on the line. Meanwhile, Mercedes has been quietly building confidence around its 2026 project. There's been growing buzz in the paddock that they may have interpreted parts of the new regulations in a particularly effective way. Nothing confirmed, nothing official, but enough speculation to raise eyebrows. Formula One history shows a clear pattern. When regulations change, engine performance defines the era. If Mercedes finds an early advantage, it could reshape the grid overnight. For Verstappen, the calculation would be simple. He doesn't need money. He doesn't need fame. He needs the best chance to win. And if Red Bull's new engine struggles, while Mercedes starts strong, the logic becomes hard to ignore. Red Bull executives have tried to project confidence, insisting that Verstappen wants to end his career with the team. But the more those reassurances are repeated, the more defensive they begin to sound. When asked what would happen if Red Bull fell behind in 2026, answers became cautious. Scenarios were acknowledged. Possibilities were left open. Toto Wolff, on the other hand, has stayed patient. Relationships with Verstappen and his family have reportedly improved. Praise has been consistent. No pressure, no rush, just availability. That's what makes the timeline so dangerous for Red Bull. Doubts began in 2024. Marko left in 2025. The engine is tested in 2026. If the performance isn't there, 2027 becomes the natural moment for a move. For Verstappen, the decision won't be easy. Red Bull gave him everything: titles, records, dominance. But the greatest drivers are remembered not for comfort, but for challenges. Winning championships with two different teams elevates a career into something legendary. Staying would be safe, leaving would be risky. But with Marko gone, the emotional barrier is lower than it's ever been. The next 12 months will decide more than just one driver's future. They'll decide the balance of power in Formula One's next era. Red Bull must prove their engine can win. Mercedes must prove their confidence is justified. And Max Verstappen will watch quietly, without emotion, knowing time is on his side. When 2027 arrives, the question won't be whether a move is shocking. It will be whether it was inevitable.